you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. Thank you to Winscribe for asking me to speak today. After that little video that you've just seen was supposed to have all the poo references removed, so that you might take me slightly more seriously than you're about to. Because the truth is, you might watch that and think that I just muck about on television and talk about poo and sing songs and dance and do lots and lots of very fun stuff, but I do that. And I am also a clinician. I work in paediatric A&E in London. I'm currently doing a job in a paediatric intensive care unit, so I get to see both sides of the paediatric spectrum, both in and outside hospital. And I'm going to give you a talk about, I suppose the theme is about innovation in the NHS. It's about technological innovation in the NHS, particularly with reference to paediatrics, and whether we really can go paperless in paediatrics. Is it a good idea, and how can we go about it from a clinician's perspective? So I'm not an IT expert. I grew up with one of these. This was my very first computer. Does anyone recognise what that was? That's the ZX Spectrum 48K. 48K of memory, and what you could do with that was wonderful, wasn't it, at the time? Fortunately, we've moved on. My iPhone is now able to do 1,000 times what that was able to, but that was where my interest in IT came from, actually. So as well as being a clinician and doing my health promotional role in the media, I've developed an interest in IT as I've grown up, and I've seen over the last 10 years in paediatrics, I've seen big changes in information technology in hospitals, and the impact it has had on care, both good and bad, and some of the challenges, unfortunately, that has cropped up. So I've continued to develop my interest. I'm highly active now, or prolific, you could say, on social media. I've got my own website, I've got a YouTube channel, I've got an Instagram profile. I'm quite prolific on Facebook as well, because I know that as a means of accessing my audience, that is a really, really good and effective and powerful way of getting through to them, actually. So I do have a bit of an interest. I'm not completely clueless when it comes to IT, although I'm sure my knowledge is still very deficient compared to you guys. So when I was researching this talk, I came across this paper that was actually published by this organisation, by the King's Fund, and I think it was back in 2008, about the title was Technology in the NHS, and the opening paragraph was really interesting, and I think really struck a chord, because essentially what they've said is, despite how great technology is, generally speaking, the NHS is quite slow and disparate in taking it on. And I think if we have any clinical people, or even some non-clinical people who worked in healthcare, you'll probably recognise some truth in that. I wouldn't say it's completely across the system. I think there are pockets where we are making big progress, but unfortunately there has been a bit of a resistance, and there have been difficulties, and unfortunately where the King's Fund recognised it, and a task force also described the NHS as a late and slow adopter of technology, which is a bit of a shame, but hopefully things will change as we get more and more involved as clinicians, and as the IT sector comes in and is able to offer us more and more and understand where we're coming from as well. So it's all about working together. So, speaking of some of the challenges that we face in healthcare when it comes to going, for instance, paperless, let's say, or digitising, or catching up with the 21st century, as I call it, anybody that's worked in healthcare will recognise this picture. This is what clinical notes often in hospitals or GP surgeries look like. That is just a small fragment of it. It is unbelievable the amount of trees that are stored in clinical notes, and it's translating that into a digital system is never going to be easy, for several reasons: for storage capacity, for back referencing, for being able to then access and update it as easily as we have been. We've become stuck in our ways to some extent. We've got used to a system, and people don't necessarily like change. So that's medical records. They need to be brought up to date, I would say. Similarly, actually, when it comes to things like imaging, so we're talking X-rays, scans, CTs, MRIs, that sort of stuff, they've been a lot more progressive than the rest of the hospital often. So we've got systems called PACS, which many people may have heard of, which are radiology viewing systems. And because images are easier to digitise and look at on computer screens, and I think to some extent don't require that much input in terms of amending and putting in entries and things like that, it's been a lot easier to adopt that sort of system. And actually that has revolutionised radiology. It means that we can share information within the hospital, between hospitals, both in this country and internationally. And it really has had a very positive impact. But saying that, I still have worked in hospitals recently that are still using X-ray films and still working with light boxes and still working with those old black and white photographic films that we so fondly remember, but are becoming quite vintage actually. Anyone who's worked in hospital will remember this, will know this site. These are clinic letters, these are request forms, these are referral letters. That is by no means the exception. That is pretty much what a doctor's desk will look like. And we've got to work out ways of getting that information into a system that's going to streamline all of that, because that's not just one type of documentation. There's hundreds of different kinds of documentation that we need to be able to integrate, ideally, into a single system, a single simple system, but that's not easy. Does anyone recognise these? I'm sure we all do. The NHS is probably the only system in the world that still relies on these, and I can't believe it. And I will pay you £100 if you can find me a functioning fax machine in my trust. Because when you find a fax machine, you've then got to work out if it works. And it is an absolute unfortunate nightmare that we still have to rely on this as a communication method when we should really be adopting scanning and emailing technology, but there is still a resistance to it, and I can't understand why. Well, actually, my understanding is that it may just be habit and tradition and resistance to change, but that's my own opinion. But unfortunately, we are still keeping brother in business. I'm sure they're delighted. And one of the other big challenges is that if you're going to introduce an IT system into a big ecosystem that is the NHS, you've got to realise that the NHS is not one organisation, unfortunately. I describe it as being similar to a department store where every concession is a different hospital. It's kind of got the same name. It's all House of Fraser or Debenhams or Harrods if you're really lucky. But essentially it is lots and lots of little stores under one big roof, and they might share the same name, but essentially they're all using different systems, different computers, different ways of working, and it's never going to be easy to introduce one thing that is going to help everybody and is going to be useful to everybody. So I don't envy that task whatsoever. And this is the other challenge. I'm not going to get too political in here, but I think that we have all seen the impact that political process can have on our NHS, both positive and negative, and unfortunately I think that sometimes it can be detrimental, and that can have a negative impact on patient care, have a negative impact on the way we work and on the systems we use. And I'm sure you've seen various examples of things come and go, and unfortunately they're never cheap things that come and go, they're always expensive. And we're currently undergoing a massive reorganisation right now, and I'm sure in another 4 years we'll probably undergo another expensive, massive reorganisation, but unfortunately that's not up to me. So why is there this big resistance to change? Well, from a clinician's perspective, I don't say I speak for everybody here, but I do see this sometimes. We don't like change. We like to keep the way, a lot of us like to keep the way things are going, because that's the systems we know, we're comfortable, it's within our comfort zone. There are a proportion of us who really want to move things forward. They want to look for new ways of doing things, better ways of doing things, and in many instances, cheaper ways of doing things as well. And the other aspect of it is that we don't like what we don't understand. Doctors can be very paternalistic. They really want to, be in control the whole time. They're a certain kind of personality, and if we don't understand something, we panic. And when it comes to IT, unfortunately, there's still a lot of us who aren't quite comfortable with information technology. Although I think that is changing, and I'm really glad that is. But that's someone just burying their head in the sand and hoping that it will go away, or that retirement will come and they won't have to bother with it. I know I've painted a bit of a doomy and gloomy picture, but there are some success stories in all of this. Anyone who works in hospital may use an electronic patient record system. There's different different manufacturers and companies that make them. I currently work at Guy's and St Thomas's Trust, and we've got a really good EPR system there, predominantly for results and documentation and referrals and letters and processing, that kind of stuff, but it will expand. We're starting to move into digital and electronic prescribing there as well, and it's working really, really well. It takes time to change, but once you have changed, you realise how good it really is. I talked about PACS earlier, which are radiology systems, which have taken off in far more places, which is good. I work in an intensive care unit at the moment, and it's it's a very intensive environment. It's very number information oriented. It's a very data oriented environment, and you know, in spite of all that, we still use paper notes. We are still a paper heavy process, still a paper heavy department. And we are in the process of introducing a clinical care system, and there's lots of them out there. The one we're looking at the moment is called CareView. And that is going to essentially combine all of those different monitors and pumps and blood results and information that's coming from various different angles and put it all together for us, which actually is what our clinical notes do, but the system can do it for us, and hopefully that will enable us to run much more efficiently than we currently are. Talked about electronic prescribing. It's coming in more and more. So you'll see a lot of anyone who's been in hospital and has been waiting to be discharged. Sometimes you hear, oh, the drug chart's gone down to pharmacy, they're getting your medicines ready, and then when it comes up, you'll be able to go home. Well, electronic prescribing is speeding up some of that process. It's making sure you've got an electronic drug chart whilst you're in hospital. Therefore, it can be accessed from anywhere. The pharmacist can check it from down in pharmacy and amend and dispense accordingly. It doesn't have to come all the way up to the ward to be able to do that. So that is making things better. Likewise, electronic discharges. This was when patients leave hospital, they get a letter sent to their GP or their carer in the community. And we were doing these all by hand, and they were taking a long time. And eventually a standard was put in to say, right, in this, and I don't know if it's just possibly within our area, but a GP needs to have an electronic notification of discharge within 48 hours. Whereas a clinic letter would, or a TTO would take possibly a couple of hours to write, and then would get popped in the post, and then may not get to the GP for another week, and in the meantime you've been back to your doctor, and your doctor knows nothing about your inpatient stay. So we are moving forward on that front as well. And I had to put this in here as well, but it is an important point. Digital dictation, which obviously is one of the things that Winscribe does. Long gone are the days where, or they're going anyway, where doctors are dictating into tape recorders, passing it on to a secretary, and then the secretary is typing it up, passing it back for it to be checked, and then it's amended and passed back again, and then it's printed and posted off. It is a long and arduous process, especially if your letters are 5 pages long, which some of our letters in paediatrics, especially in the community, are. But we are still being extremely slow to adopting this sort of technology, which could make things so much faster. It would free up so much secretarial time. They could be used to do other things, and therefore the whole workflow process becomes better. We are getting there, and I'm hoping that people like Winscribe are going to help us do that. That's the good side of it. We have been involved in IT stuff before, as you all know. The NHS IT programme, I don't know much of the ins and outs of it, but unfortunately, for whatever reason it didn't quite work out to plan. Don't know which way things are going to go there, but we do have to be careful that we don't repeat our mistakes, and that's on both sides, I think. We have to learn from our experience in the past and make sure that we do something that's better, or at least handle it better. But part of this reason, I think, is, as I was talking about, political influence and interference, for want of a better term. So anyone who might sit down and therefore try and solve this big problem of NHS IT and going paperless and being digital would be forgiven for thinking it's confusing, because I definitely do, and it's not an easy riddle to solve. And add to that fact that in paediatrics we have an added layer of complication, and I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that there are to those sorts of processes within that are specific to paediatrics themselves. So this is just some kids on a computer. So one of the challenges that we have is that paediatrics is not one group of patients. I'm afraid it's not one market, it's not one age bracket, it's nothing like that. Adult patients, on the whole, generally speaking, tend to be a reasonably homogenous group. There is an elderly care, there are the specialist groups, and then there's everybody else as well. But in paediatrics, a neonate or a premature baby is extremely different to a preschool child, is extremely different to a school-age child, has extremely different needs to a teenager and an adolescent. And if they've got special needs, then they may still be under our care until they're 20, 21, 22 years old. And they have completely different needs in terms of care, in terms of the data and information that is involved in their care as well. So this is not a single group of patients. You're having to think of lots of different algorithms already. Added to that, as is always the case across the health service, there's a big issue with confidentiality, particularly when it comes to children's information. We have to be extremely careful who is able to access it and make sure that the right people can still access it, because some of that information may be sensitive. So it's big. We have a very strong and important relationship with things like social care and social services. Some of that information is extremely sensitive, and I think that we are still trying to get that relationship right, and anything we can do to improve that is a really big step forward. Paediatric patients are more likely to have multidisciplinary involvement to some extent, especially if they've got chronic needs. So in some ways they're very similar to the elderly care population. They may have lots of different specialists involved, both inside and outside the hospital. So we need to make sure that all the right people can access their information. And that's what brings them to access. They've got to be able to get to this information, they've got to be able to get it quickly, it's got to be appropriate for them, and it's got to be robust and safe in the whole time. So just a typical, and the other consideration is, are you going to use any of the information for research? And what ethical implications does that bring up when it comes to children and consent around data and things like that? Particularly when children are becoming teenagers and becoming more independent of their parents. So this is our average patient, just to illustrate in terms of who might be involved in a child's care and who might want access to information and who might need to have data shared with them. First of all, there's their general practitioner out in the community. Then there may be a nurse, both in the community and in the hospital setting. There may be a paediatrician or a specialist based in a centre somewhere, and that might be both in secondary care and then going on to specialist, subspecialist, tertiary care as well. Then there's the community practitioners, health visitors, school nurses, and that includes things like therapists. So some children do have therapy in the community, physiotherapy, speech and language therapy. They all want to know information, and they all will want to be privy to that. There's schools. We must never forget that a child who's a patient has an entire microenvironment around them. That includes their family, that includes their school, that includes all the healthcare services that are involved in them, as well as themselves. There's always parents. They may want to know, is it appropriate? What information should they get? And we are being much more open with parents than we have been, in the long past. And then likewise, there's the patient themselves. So that's a teenager rolling their eyes, and they often get a bad reputation, but they will want to know information and data about them as well. So how do we create systems that allow us to do all of this for everyone in all the ways that they want us to? So I'll just illustrate a typical paediatric journey of a child. So let's say, for instance, if any of you got children, you might take them to your GP because they're unwell. The GP then needs to access a system that holds information about these children. They may then be referred on to A&E. There's going to have to be some sort of transfer of information at that point. So there's another system potentially involved there. We may even go back to paper at that point, having been in an electronic system in your GP surgery. We often do go back to paper in transit. Then they're treated by clinical staff, and that may involve an assessment on paper, that may involve some amount of treatment electronically. Investigations may be requested, and I work in a trust where that's all done electronically and speeds things up. But obviously there are still places that have paper systems as well. They may then be admitted to a ward. There's more paperwork done at that point. There are medical notes that are created. And further investigations may be requested. Again, that's going to involve more interaction with systems. They may be referred to other teams or departments, for instance, specialist services. Again, referrals end up being on paper. We are slightly starting to move forward from that as well. A very important point with children is liaison with other agencies. So as I said, they often have other agencies involved in their care. It's important that we talk to each other. Because when we don't talk to each other, that's when tragedies like Victoria Climbié happen, because there isn't adequate and appropriate information sharing happening between people. So again, we need to work out a robust system to do that. They get discharged home. What are they going to go home with? They go home with paper, and then we're going to need to inform their GP, and then they may need to come back to our outpatient clinic. So there's lots of transits of information going on, and that all has to be secure. And there's lots of different systems, unfortunately, currently being employed just to see one patient, which I think is a bit of a shame to some extent. And if we can streamline that, that would be fantastic. Why is it important then to streamline? Why is it important to go paperless or to go digital, let's say? Well, it's definitely going to improve workflow. We've seen that in lots of different examples. It will improve our efficiency. We've seen that. Filling out a form takes a long time. If you can just press a button and it does it, that's brilliant. And certainly we've started doing that more and more. Hopefully at the same time it will save us time, and time is precious in the NHS, unfortunately. We are all working to time targets. And cost targets and efficiency targets, and anything we can do to try and cut back on that would be really good. Not only will it reduce cost, hopefully, so it will save in terms of raw materials and time, that will all save us money. There is the potential for IT to increase income. I've just been at another talk this morning talking about how hospital A&E departments earn their money. And it's through a process called coding, where you basically code what you do and you get paid for what you do. The problem is that system isn't automated. So often things get missed and you lose money, whereas people are now bringing in IT systems to automatically code. So if you order a blood test, it will automatically tell the system you've ordered a blood test, and therefore you will get paid for that blood test. If you've ordered a blood test and the doctor hasn't physically remembered or thought about writing it down in the relevant place, then you won't get paid for it. So this is and the simple logical thing would be that if you order it, it should automatically do it. But you'd be surprised at how many systems still don't do that. They still don't talk to each other. Like I said, it's important that we improve information sharing to prevent tragedies that we have seen in safeguarding cases in the past. I like the fact that electronic documents or digital documents could have extra features built in. They could have links built in, which is a really good potential use for them. And likewise, the more digital we go, hopefully, the more we will save the environment and reduce our impact on things like forests around the country and around the world. So then I kind of come on to that's why we want it, and that's the problems we've got, and that's some of the challenges that we're facing. Well, what is it that we actually want? Now, this is my personal NHS wish list. This is what I'm going to be giving Santa Claus this year. My ideal IT system or NHS digital system will be simple. Okay, I've seen lots of different types of NHS IT system in various different hospitals over the last 12 years. And there are some reasonable ones, and there are some ones that are very, very complicated. We don't need our systems to be able to make us tea and toast as well as be our electronic notes. We just need them to do the job that we expect them to do. We don't need the knobs and whistles on them, and unfortunately a lot of systems are, I think, unnecessarily, unfortunately complicated. If you're going to design an IT system, I'm sure there's lots of people in here that will be involved in that sort of thing and could tell me more about it, but I don't see why we can't design a system that's based in real life. Why not design one that looks like a set of patient notes that everyone's already familiar with and has been brought up on? Why can't it be divided up according to the same dividers that you will find in medical notes? Why can't it be like that? Why does it have to be a completely new graphical user interface that everyone then has to get familiar with and navigate around, which is so completely different to the paper notes that they're used to? Why can't we just emulate the thing across? It has to be accessible. We need to be able to access it from all over the place, and we have to get fast access to it, and it has to be accessible on different platforms. Bearing in mind different hospitals will use different operating systems and have different states of hardware, I suppose, in their trusts. It needs to be easily linked into existing stuff, into clinical practice and to existing electronic systems that we've got, because realistically there are going to be systems that are going to be there forever, and we need to be able to link all of them up. It needs to be easy to use. It needs to be intuitive, I would say. It should be obvious, is how when I moan about IT systems, as I say, it should be obvious. We shouldn't have to think too much that I need to go through X, Y, and Z just to get that. And likewise, it should be easy to train people on it. We spend a lot of time training people on how to use IT systems in hospital. And it should communicate with other systems. It should communicate with, it should be easy to communicate across hospitals. It should be easy to link people up with each other. It's got to be effective, so it's got to do what it says on the tin, and therefore it's got to be efficient. Obviously, it's got to be upgradable. We know that. Most systems are auditable. That's important in terms of accountability and things, and paper trails and things like that. Has to be secure and robust. That kind of goes without saying. An intelligent system would be nice that lets you do extra things, lets you plug in extra little bits. It needs to be collaborative. By collaborative, I mean it should be designed by not just clinicians, not just IT people. It should be designed by groups that work together, that understand each other and know what the needs and capabilities are. I won't be able to tell you what an IT system can do, but I can tell you what I would like it to do. As an IT person, they might turn around and say, well, I can offer you this, or I can make that happen, or have you thought of this? Portability is good. We're starting to move more and more into computers on wheels, which is the predecessor to tablets. So we sometimes still wheel around a computer. We call it a cow, a computer on wheels, around departments. We are moving towards more tablet working, but I think we still have a way to go there. And it has to be pretty. I know that sounds superficial, but if a system looks ugly, people don't like using it. The reason, personally, I think that part of the reason Apple is so successful is their systems are intuitive. They don't want to be particularly safe. And this is coming from a PC user. I grew up on PCs and I loved PCs, and then I switched to Apple. But they look so much nicer. They're much more enjoyable to use, and I think that's something we shouldn't forget. And I have used systems that aren't pretty. So there's no magical answer to this, but I don't know if that's going to project very well, but that's essentially saying that we all need to come together and we all need to talk to each other, and we all need to borrow from each other's expertise and experience. I work literally on the coalface in A&E. I'm not a consultant. I am on the shop floor. I use systems day in, day out. I'm not one of the hospital managers. I'm not one of these people who just dips in and out. I need a system that works for me and that works for my department and makes my department work better. That's what I want to see. So I think sometimes what happens is when certain systems are designed, they talk to very senior people who have been through other systems and other processes and may not necessarily use those systems on a day-to-day basis and know the intricacies or the ins and outs of them. Talk to the people that are right on the coalface. They'll know. So we all need to come together and bring all our bits of the jigsaw together and create something that we can all use and hopefully will make things better. So with that, it's over to you guys, I'm afraid. It's not going to be me that's going to be able to design something like this, but I'm hoping that there will be lots of people in this room that will have the passion and the possibilities to be able to do something. And I thank you all very much for your time.